Welcome one and all to Umami Manga. I'm Petter and this is James.
What's up?
And today we're talking about the first volume of Frieren Beyond Journey's End. Yet another new series that we're starting.
Very new.
We relatively recently started Spy Family as well, which was new for us, although it had been out since 2019, I think it started. Was it?
Yes.
But this one, yes, as you said, this one is very, very new. It started last year in April, in like the chapters started publishing in Japan then, but it only started like the first volume released in English earlier this month. So we are really on top of it with this one. Basically, we're going to talk about each of the characters one by one. That's kind of the formula for our episode. So starting with Frieren, and actually about the names, I was a bit confused at first on how to pronounce a couple of the names. Frieren being one of them, obviously, like it's the first name you know.
Yeah, it's a difficult name.
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure it's Frieren because of two reasons. And the first reason is there's a lot of German influence, or at least vocabulary or names and stuff in this series. And I know that. Well, I took 6 years of German in school, so I definitely can't speak it fluently, but I do know some basics, and I know that the combination IE makes the E sound, so it's Frieren.
Okay.
With that in mind, and the other thing I looked up out of curiosity, I looked up the Japanese name for Frieren, and it's Frieren.
That
So
makes sense.
it's also the E sound there.
You want to know what my dumb assumption at first, but I had to like think about it. I was like, okay, well that's FRIE. That's like friend, Frieren,
Oh.
Frieren. But I was like, that didn't sound right.
I mean, there
And
is logic to it, though.
yeah, English logic, more like the lack of. And yeah, so Frieren just makes Frieren. Yeah, it just makes more sense to me.
Right, right. But yeah, first of all, about her character, I just want to say, or about her character design, I really love her character design.
Of course you would.
It's wait, what's of course about that?
She's
Or-
got she's got pigtails or
oh yeah,
ponytails, whatever you call
right,
them.
yeah. Actually, that is a big plus.
You see?
you're, you're right. For some reason, that wasn't the first thing I thought of just now, but yes, absolutely. Uh,
I don't think you're a lolicon or anything like that. That's not what I was saying.
uh, well, no, but I just really, I'm a big fan of that. I think she's got some of the most beautiful manga eyes I've seen in a while as well. So, and hey, elf ears are cute too. But anyway, I'm not gonna simp too hard. I'm gonna really try to limit myself a little.
Yeah. As a Legend of Zelda fan, we both are Legend of Zelda fans. You know, you kind of grew up seeing Zelda with the elf ears, and well, a lot of the characters having that kind of thing, and obviously elves are other things. But whenever I saw Frieren with her hair down, or yeah, Frieren with her hair down, I always had to convince myself that it wasn't Zelda, or she didn't, because according to the cover, she doesn't have blonde hair; she has white hair. I'm not sure how accurate that is.
No, there was a line as well by one of the NPCs. I almost said we're talking Zelda.
That's right.
A character who said white hair and recognized her as Frieren because of that.
Yeah, you're right. I forgot about that. But so I had to convince myself, like, no. It's white, not blonde.
Right. Yes. So I really like the focus on Frieren's slow aging and it's kind of how she perceives the flow of time. Like
hmm
that's something that I mean clearly I guess it's not 100% unique, but and like the whole deal about elves aging almost like infinitely slow is I think a thing ever since like Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Like
hmm
it's been around for a long time. But I don't feel like this exact focus, or at least I haven't seen this exact focus really in other fiction before. For example, like how she said she would visit from time to time when she left, after they had the celebration. But she didn't show up again until 50 years later, and for her that was like no time at all.
Right.
And also like during the search for the blue moon weed, like that was another interesting thing that showed kind of how how incredibly patient she is due to not considering long periods of time to actually be that long.
Right. I mean, to her, it's not that long.
Right.
Her understanding of time, because time is relative, right?
Absolutely.
We understand that theory to be as true as we can at this point.
Mm.
And in this fiction, I think that for her, just time moves differently. Maybe I don't know. I can't even say if she's at the middle of her life, but I agree that a lot of these, um, lack of a better word, issues that are in this story happen because it's her thinking about how she understands time and not how humans do.
Right.
You know, there's kind of that a gap in understanding a bit. Although
Yeah.
as she goes about her journey, she does seem to be understanding that a bit more.
Yeah, right. It's really interesting because she has, well, has a hard time understanding or comprehending how we as humans understand it, and obviously we as humans can't quite understand her perspective either. So it
Right.
really is. I think it's a really fun idea to kind of play around with, and like their 10-year-old or their 10-year long journey that they had before the story started. Obviously, to her, it felt like a really short time,
Yeah.
and it also seemed to imply that, and this is probably due to her experiencing time much differently from humans. It seemed to imply that she has a harder time getting to know people, or at least it takes her much longer than it would take for a human.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, since she claims that she hardly knew anything about Himmel after he died, and she also apologized to Fern later on when because she didn't, well, she apologized for not knowing anything about her after they had been traveling together for at least a whole year at that point.
Mm-hmm.
But then we had examples of Himmel and Fern both seeming to know Frieren very very well. So I thought that was another interesting kind of, I guess, consequence or side thing of her time perception.
Right. Yeah, it's very interesting how he or the author goes about uh, setting that up.
Mm.
And to me, I wonder how old she actually is.
Right.
We never understand her true age, and I'm not sure if that's even something that will be revealed per se, because it's not necessarily vital for the story. But
Mm.
the fact that she has been, and as this volume confirms, around for at least 1,000 years, well, more than 1,000 years, it just makes you wonder, you know, at what point in time is she in her life? Is she in her mid 20s? Is she, just comparatively speaking, can you even compare it?
Yeah,
You
that's
know,
right.
is it more of like a immortal kind of a thing?
Mm.
I don't know.
Yeah, that is a really good question.
So to your point, it makes sense that she feels like she doesn't know humans or some of her friends that she's been with for 10 years. Doesn't feel like she knows them very well because to her it's maybe a week. Like
Right.
10 years, or maybe 10 years is a day.
Yeah,
I
right.
really don't know, because because to her 1,000 years ago did seem like, okay, that was a fair amount of time.
Mm.
So it's like, what is that 10 years for her? Like I don't that I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm excited to see more, or I guess to learn more in future volumes about that, because I feel like this is something that's going to continue being explored, kind of to for us and other human characters in the story to understand her better, and also the other way around, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess speaking of her past, what we did get, like we got a glimpse of her past in the last chapter of this volume, where
Mm-hmm.
we got to know about her former teacher, which was a human mage called Flamme, which I'm pretty sure just means flame in German. Like I think that it's just the German word for flame.
Mm.
At least one of the chapters prior to that, we had heard a little bit of Flamme, but nothing big really.
Right.
And it made me think that it would be cool to, well, I guess to explore her past more going forward. So
Mm-hmm.
I guess I don't necessarily need all the details. I don't even need to know exactly her age. I think I would like to know more about her past though, and I would like to know more about Flamme perhaps. Which I feel like we
Yeah.
should.
Definitely Flamme.
Yeah, right.
I feel that knowing where how Flame met Frieren, no,
Mm.
dang it,
Yeah, yeah.
is that
Frieren,
okay?
yes, yes.
Frieren, how they met, I think would be a pretty good thing to reveal,
Mm-hmm.
but who's to say?
Mm-hmm. Then there was the part where when Himmel died and that they were at the funeral, Frieren said that she wasn't so sure that he was happy. Did you have any idea what she meant there? Because I didn't really understand that part.
Um, I'm not exactly sure what she was thinking at the moment, but I could think of reasons why Himmel wasn't as happy as maybe Frieden was hoping that he'd be.
Mm.
It and maybe part of it had to do with he waited so long for her to return, and she never did. It was not until 50 years later.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and I guess Himmel wasn't able to spend more time with her or even the other guys. Maybe, although maybe they came and visited sometimes. Who knows? Um, but definitely not Frieden.
Right.
So yeah, I think that when I read that, that was my really only thought as to what it could be. Maybe some sort of regret. Not well, not even regret because it's not something he could do. You know.
Right. But still, like a sadness, like a sorrow that he may have carried, and that she may have kind of realized in that moment, because it is later in that same scene when Frieren herself sort of realizes that she wishes that she had been able to spend more time with him and gotten to know him better, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so it might have been something that she was just thinking about in general that day or that in that moment. So she figured that maybe he had had similar thoughts,
Maybe.
perhaps, or that she had just recently kind of understood to some extent that human lives are that much shorter. I guess since that had just happened, like this might have been the first human that she befriended who passed away potentially, or no, I guess her teacher would have. What?
Yeah.
I don't know. But anyway, like speaking of the kind of realization she had that at the funeral, and she wishes that she would have tried to get to know him better, and which I think that is probably regret there. It might not be regret
Mm-hmm.
from Himmel, but for her, I think in that moment it's regret. But when she realizes that she her new aim is to learn more about humans,
Right.
and then with the way this book ends, it kind of seems like she's going to learn more about Himmel himself as well eventually, if she will be able to speak to him, like to communicate with his soul.
Yeah, I like that we have a goal, an objective, and it's not
Mm.
a. I mean, speaking to the dead is pretty, I guess, big, but it's not a grand take down the Demon King, was because they've already done that.
Exactly.
So I'm excited to see how she grows to learn more about humans,
Yeah.
because even during this volume 1, we see her attempting to understand Fern and even some of the other of her former comrades,
Yeah.
getting to know them better. So
Exactly.
she's definitely putting in the effort, and honestly, it feels like she's grasping on something, um, but then she kind of doubts herself and says, I know nothing about you," and
Right.
yet she's able to do these things, and maybe she just doesn't realize that a person, knowing something about a person or caring for a person is not necessarily. I don't know. I don't even know what she's trying to find. Like, what's the moment where she's like, oh, I know this person so well.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is it? Just time for her? Like, is that really all it takes? Well, I mean, that's a pretty
Mm.
heavy task.
Yeah, I mean that is interesting because now you got me thinking that what if she doesn't, or that what if she doesn't get to know people slower, but basically only that her, I guess, standards for getting to know people, or standards for considering knowing someone are just higher
Hmm.
than most humans.
Yeah, maybe.
If it might just be that actually she knows everyone, like all of those people, just as well as anyone else would, having spent that much time with them. But she just, I guess, requires more, or she needs to know even more and be even closer to them in order to kind of put that label on them and consider them as people that she knows. Maybe.
Maybe. I, yeah. I'm not entirely sure. There's a couple instances that I can think of, but I think one of them I want to save for later. So we'll
Mm,
just work for that.
yeah, absolutely. And oh yeah, and now I'm gonna mention another character that I had to think a little bit on the pronunciation of the name, and I've settled on Heiter is the priest.
Okay.
Because EI is I, and
Mm.
the Japanese, at least Romanji, uh, name for him is Haita. So yeah, Heiter. And anyway, what I was gonna say about him is that, or kind of on this topic that we've been talking about for Frieren here, is that when he is when Heiter is dying and when he after he had collapsed and he was lying in bed, Frieren heeds him to spend time with Fern instead of just pushing her away, which was one of my favorite scenes in this book,
Mm.
because it showed that, or it showed even more kind of since the funeral scene, that how she really kind of regretted her own actions in regards to Himmel, and so she heeds him to do what she didn't, basically, in that scene. So I really enjoyed that part.
That's a great point. I didn't put that together, other than I just thought that was a very kind thing for her to say. But
Mm,
yeah, you're right. There, I think she totally has regret for not spending more time with Himmel,
yeah,
especially since compared to her life, his life is so short.
yeah,
So talking about kind of her goal before what goes down in chapter 2 and beyond, basically her gathering magic.
yes,
And it's kind of brought up a few times where afterwards where Fern says, you're so obsessed with magic and yet you insist you're just like me. I don't think we're the same.
mm-hmm,
And I think it comes down to one taking Friedren's word for it in that she's not obsessed with magic per se, but she likes helping others with the magic she has. She kind of enjoys being praised, I think.
yeah,
We see that when she makes those flowers in the flashback, and uh, you know the the party is very happy.
mm-hmm, yeah,
And they kind of praise her for a good job. Himmel gives her the crown and everything.
mm,
And then we see it in that same chapter where I think it's the same chapter where uh, they take the rust off the statue, and they plant all those uh, blue wheat flowers.
mm.
And whenever the grandma praises her, she kind of gets a kind of proud face. She's like, "Hey,
Oh
you
yeah,
know, hey."
right.
Um, yeah, I think a good reason why she wants to gather all these spells is that when she gets into a situation, her magic can assist people. And I know I'm talking a long time, but some of the other spells that she found almost were meant for her friends, like her old friends.
Yeah.
So the rust for the statue was Himmel.
Mm,
I'm not exactly sure if she knew that consciously, and that's why she sought that. But maybe
mm,
maybe she did.
right.
But then there was the turning the sweet grapes to sour grapes,
Yeah.
which I mean, I don't know. That just seems such like an odd spell, but okay, or even odd flavor request, or a taste.
Uh-huh. No, no, but like I think that one was absolutely 100% intended for Eisen.
Hmm.
Like, there's no way she didn't have him in mind when she acquired that spell.
Yeah, I think that these gathering these spells was definitely not so much. Well, I can't say definitely, but it wasn't so much for her own, magic gathering and hobby in a way, but more
Mm.
so pleasing the people that she cared about.
Yeah, dude, I really like that because, or I didn't pick up on it kind of as a whole, as in she enjoys the praise of just and like anyone around her in that way. But I think you're
Hmm.
absolutely right. I did pick up on the fact, basically the way I read it was that there was that flashback to the flowers in the party in which she made flowers around the party members,
Hmm.
and then it switched back to present day, and she said that she used to get praise from someone. Like she doesn't say a name, but the last panel before that had been of Himmel, so I just assumed
Right.
that it was specifically when Himmel praised her that made her, that made her, I guess, so keen on learning all these new forms of magic.
Mm-hmm.
But I really like your idea there that it's just anyone in general, and it explains a lot of other things as well, I think.
Absolutely. And I think Himmel may have been a kind of a starting point for that.
Right.
But then as she kept using these spells for other people's, maybe people's, for other people, she saw that, oh, hey, when I do these nice things or I do these things with my magic, I get praise,
Yeah.
especially from the people I care about.
Mm. This idea that you brought up, it made me think of the conversation that Frieren and Fern had about sort of, I guess, how much they like magic and those sorts of things. Because I guess I was a bit stumped when I read the book at first or earlier, well, before our conversation just now, because
Mm-hmm.
in that Frieren says that she and Fern are the same, but Fern only somewhat likes magic, and it's like, or and Fern didn't understand it either. Like there were several occasions throughout this book when she just couldn't comprehend
Right.
how dedicated Frieren is, yet she doesn't claim to be that into magic. But this really explains it because they are the same with this new knowledge that you have helped me understand. Because Fern started to use magic for a reason that didn't necessarily require magic, but she just went the magic route. And
Mm-hmm.
this is basically the exact same thing with Frieren. So yeah, that is really cool.
And I think that will be expounded upon
Yeah,
as we go about this journey. But yeah, I think that pretty much hits the nail on the head.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. And yeah, I guess I may have somewhat mentioned this, but I just wanted to kind of shed a little more light on kind of one of the major reasons why I love Frieren so much is that, or kind of what makes her so cool to me, is that she has this desire to learn and to better herself, and she's
Mm.
actively pursuing those sorts of goals. Like, she really wants to understand how humans perceive time, and I guess just life in general. And she decides, to take Fern under her wing because people that she looked up to would have done the same, or actually, well, in one case, did that. Although he did it he did it because he figured Himmel would have done it. But anyway, uh, it's just nice to see this character who is so driven to just improve herself in not just like combat or physical stuff, which I feel like is the case in most, or in maybe not most, or well, maybe most, at least in a lot of stories anyway. You see the protagonist is just kind of like training and like kind of trying to better themselves combatively or physically. But here we have this protagonist who is just trying to become a better person, and I think that's very admirable.
Except for waking up early. That's
That's a hard habit to break. Hashtag relatable for me. Like, oh my god, I also sleep until noon unless anything specifically happens. Like, I really enjoyed that.
No, but I agree so much is that she's a person that is striving for self improvement, and I
Mm,
think part of that is due to the connections that she's made, with Himmel's group and everything, and
yeah.
you know, I think they had a big influence on her, even though it was only to her only 10 years.
Right.
I think they had a pretty big influence on her, and so
Yeah.
that probably led her to want to become better and be better. Because when we had the flashback with Master Flamme, it seems that Frieden is not quite, I don't know, like she just not quite in tune with her human side. Is it? I mean, yeah, like she understands her master, but at the
Mm,
same time, it's like Flamme seems like Frieden has a lot of growing up to do,
mm.
and that she doesn't quite understand humans the way she should. And so maybe it wasn't until Frieden went on this adventure with Himmel and the others that she maybe understands where she needs to grow now.
Yeah. Right.
Is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. So yeah, it's just something I enjoy to see. Well, her, well, as you said, like finding where she needs to improve and then really pursuing that is really cool. It's shown a couple times, especially early on in the book, obviously, when Heiter is still alive, that he tends to pat Frieren on the head, and that she doesn't really like that. and just a funny little side gag, I guess, from time to time. But what I thought was kind of even more funny was that she then starts doing that same thing to Fern.
Oh,
Or
really?
at least two times in the book, she also petted Fern on the head. Fern didn't resist it though, so it wasn't quite the same dynamic. But it was still fun to see that that Frieren now has someone that she does that to. Uh, I I do love Frieren's sort of dense side as well that pops up here and there.
Uh-huh.
I mean, we talked about her like sleeping in or like yeah, just having a really hard time waking up in the morning
Hmm.
or at noon even maybe. Anyway, uh which I thought was well, as I say, well that part was relatable, but then there were some other really funny moments where well, apparently we understand that she has a knack for getting tricked by mimic chests,
Yeah, I
and
love that.
that seems to be a
That
recurring
gag was so
thing.
great.
Yeah. And another part that got me laughing pretty well was when she sees Fern's chest has grown larger than her own, and she's like, "We eat mostly the same things, though. How strange."
It's the pancakes, pancakes versus pudding. I just go for the pancakes. Uh, by the way, those pancakes look dang delicious. Like, oh my
Uh-huh.
gosh, I wanted some pancakes.
Yeah. Oh my God. It looked so much too. Like
Yeah.
I would not have been able to eat all of that probably. uh.
Hence why Fern is a growing girl. Uh, no, I agree that she can be dense, and that's probably part of the reason maybe why she doesn't realize or why she feels like she doesn't understand people like
Mm,
Himmel. You
mm,
know,
mm, mm.
um, so maybe it's a mixture of her elf elf understanding of time, but also just her personality, maybe.
Right.
But at the end of the day, she's a very very good person, and while they repeatedly call her kind of cold-hearted uh, at times, Himmel, like, for example, trusts her to get rid of that one demon sorcerer, Qual, whatever his name was.
Exactly.
And
Mm.
even though he told the villagers, yeah, she's not going to check up on it, but he trusted that she would come back and destroy him.
Yeah.
So I think that was really great to see that one, she had the trust of her comrades, but she is mindful of things and people and is a very good person.
Absolutely. So yeah, anything more on Frieren?
I think I'm good.
Cool. Then let's move on to Himmel a bit. Well, what we learn pretty much right off the bat is that he's very full of himself and very obsessed with his appearance and
I mean,
stuff like
he
that.
seems to be a narcissistic guy, but I couldn't tell if it was just a joke kind of a
Oh.
thing, or if he
Mm.
was just being that way just to be funny.
Oh,
Because
dude, interesting.
I
Mm.
think that's a maybe not a stereotype, but it could be a funny quirk. But
Yeah.
or was he actually for real, just really into himself? I can see it going either way.
Really, yes,
But
yes.
all those time where he was narcissistic, it was kind of jokingly.
Yeah, right. It wasn't completely serious, probably, at least.
Hmm.
Right. Yeah, I think you're right about that. But yeah, and as we mentioned a little bit earlier, he also has this very kind-hearted side of him as well, like
Yeah,
genuinely very sweet person.
he's like a role model to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I really liked the old man design for him. It was a fun contrast to the old one. Uh, but
Still handsome.
he still has those sexy eyes. um, and even though he doesn't have any hair on his head, he still has like an abundance of facial hair that he can still keep in fine condition.
You're bald now. There's nothing left to style. There's a lot you can do even with this.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, he's funny, and I like his character. Obviously, he's not my favorite in the story right now, just because of the lack of screen time. But
Hmm.
I'm excited to see how they explore all these characters, both past and present,
Yeah.
and hopefully see some um, growth or um, kind of new revelations there. That'd be really nice.
Hmm.
One thing that really kind of shocked me about Himmel was was the old man, his old man design. Not so much the design, but just how much he ages and deprecate or decreases in size. Uh, especially since he technically wasn't the oldest in the party. I mean, putting the dwarf and elf aside, Heiter was supposedly older, right?
Supposedly, yeah, yeah. Although it doesn't necessarily need to be much older. Like there could have just been like a 5 year difference potentially.
Yeah, it could have been 5 years. I tend to think it was a little more.
Mm.
I wouldn't be surprised if. So here's my thinking is that when they started their journey, Himmel was in his 20s, maybe just right at 20. And then 10 years later, he'd be 30.
Right, right.
Then 50 years later, 80. So he died around 80, but you probably give or take a few years.
Yeah.
So it makes sense to him to be that size and for him to pass away, especially medieval times. Living to 80 was, wow, you're ancient. But freaking Heiter here, well, I guess we'll talk about Heiter there. But my point is, he only lives to 80 while some other people live a little older. So it's kind of sad that he didn't get to be there longer. But then again, we wouldn't have the story that we're having now if that was the case.
And he still exists in the past, so that's
right.
And that's where a decent portion of the story takes place. So
yeah, but who knows? Maybe the reason why Himmel may have passed away when he did, maybe it could have been because, well, I don't know. I was gonna say something really crazy like because Frieren wasn't there with him, but then it doesn't make sense either because he sees her in the end. So I don't know.
Well, something that I've heard of in some cases, old people will. And I'm not sure exactly how scientific this is, but something I've heard at least from people and from different sources is that elderly people that are close to dying from old age can sometimes sort of hold on in some way until they're able to meet kind of their loved ones, their family, like for one last time, and then they'll die after that, after they've been able to do that. So could have been something like that, perhaps. Like she like he didn't want to meet or die or pass on until he had met Frieren one more time, perhaps, potentially.
Yeah, I could see that.
So he was able to hang on a little extra, or something like that.
Yeah, that definitely was a better way of saying it than I was. I was kind of saying the opposite, but I think it makes more sense that he'd want to hold on until she got there, and then he passes.
Yeah. Anything more on him?
I think that's it.
All right, then moving on to Heiter, the priest who loves to drink.
The corrupt priest.
Yeah. That was also a funny little recurring gag with him. Well, we talked earlier about his age.
Yeah,
or what it could have been like when he died. What did you have to say about that?
At least 100 years old. At least. Because Himmel was 80 when he died, at least. Around there.
Oh, yeah.
And then 20 years later, he's with Fern, and that's when Frieren goes to see him. So
true.
He's at least 100, but he could be more.
You're right. Yeah, like if he is 100, then he would have been the same age or so as Himmel, which probably isn't the case.
No, I don't think is the case.
Right.
That's why I say it's got to be at least.
Right. Yeah. Oh, dude, I didn't think of it that way. I guess I paid a lot of attention to Fern's age, but not at all for Heiter.
It feels like something I would have done versus you.
But oh my god, that's crazy. Like he probably lived to like 110 or something, maybe even more than that.
Yeah, something like that. But it's funny because, because he was older than him even when they were on their adventure. At least that's what's implied. So what did his priestly calling extend his life? I mean, the man was a mad drunk. Like, yeah. I don't know. I mean, I guess it's just them the breaks kind of a thing. I wonder if, going back to Himmel, I wonder if Himmel had a aching heart or something, and maybe that's why he died when he did. I don't know.
Well, no, I'd say he died at a more realistic age. Did I?
True, you're good point. That's a good point. But in that time frame, yeah, that's more realistic.
Even these days, 80 is more regular than 110. You know.
True, that's true. Yeah,
Uh,
good point.
so I'd say Heiter is definitely the odd one, the weird one here.
Good point. Good point.
But yeah, he had that grimoire, that one that he asked Frieren to decipher. It was obviously one that contains spells on resurrection and immortality and all that, and it was found in the grave
No, it didn't.
of a well, yeah, no, it didn't, but it was found in the grave of a sage called Evig. And that is the German word for eternal. It's actually also the Swedish word for eternal, just spelt with a V instead of W. But so that made it easy for me to understand that. But I thought that was a nice little I don't know what you call it, Easter egg. I don't know. But
Yeah,
obviously it's tied
nudge,
to
whatever.
right exactly, because obviously that word is tied to like immortality and stuff like that. So
So, with a name like Eternal, okay, I better try to translate this.
right. Yeah. And but yeah, like about that, like I really liked how while Heiter was afraid of dying, he didn't really care all that much for the immortality and resurrection spells. Like the only reason he did what he did there with Frieren and with Fern, that what was like why he made her to decipher the grimoire and all that, was so he could get to, so basically so he could make it so that Fern could go along with the Frieren on her journey.
It was a ploy.
It was, and it was really nice. I really enjoyed that twist because I didn't see that coming, and it also really showed how good of a person he is, or at least that he had become, I suppose.
I did see it coming, like just the fact that he kind of set it up that way. But I think the whole him lying about being afraid of death and everything, I think that what he did there kind of gave him peace as he was about to die, because I think his real fear, or his new fear, I guess I should say, became leaving Fern without anybody, leaving her alone.
Right, right.
Um,
So in that sense, he was afraid of death,
yeah,
just in a way that we
a
hadn't
different
really
way.
anticipated. Yeah.
Hmm.
So yeah, I really enjoyed his, I guess, arc, I guess, in this book.
Indeed, clever guy.
For sure. Yeah. So more on Heiter?
I liked his little speech about, well, at least the little thing he said to Fern when she was a little girl and thinking about jumping off that cliff.
Yeah.
Basically about keeping the memories of the people that left before us, um, keeping them alive for as long as we can. And I think that's a nice kind of memento, I guess you could say, or just a nice thing to keep in your heart, I guess.
Absolutely. 100%. Yeah. I also really like that part. Then shall we move on to the final party member, Eisen?
Sure.
He is a dwarf, so it seems it's somehow established that he, while obviously he doesn't age nearly as slow as Frieren does, he does still age slower than humans, which I think is also a Lord of the Rings kind of thing, lore thing. If I'm not mistaken, I'm not that big into Lord of the Rings, but I think that's also the case there with dwarves and stuff.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's a thing.
Mm.
Axe wielding dwarf, the muscles of the group.
Yes.
You see how ripped he was when he kind of goes into that prayer motion, and then it goes into the present, and he's basically skin and bones. That said, even skin and bones is able to lift this huge boulder. So just imagine what his strength was in his prime.
Right, exactly. That was really good. Yeah. And I guess my one big thing on Eisen for this book here was that he is, or at least, well, obviously it's mostly in the last chapter of the book here, where he gets most of the focus, but it's established or early on in that chapter that back, well, when the party was traveling together, he was a pretty firm atheist, it seemed. But then Heiter said that thing about that faith can bring, well, it brings a nicer way to view death, well, essentially. And that obviously really resonated with Eisen, or he really adopted that kind of, and turns out to be pretty much a fully fledged believer in present day when they come visit him, which I thought was a really interesting kind of turnaround for a character like him to do that. Well, I know we didn't know him too well, but still, I do think it's a fun 180 kind of in terms of that, and this comes from someone who, like me, not a religious person personally, but I still thought that part of the story and that kind of, well, that change for Eisen was a really nice one to see.
I also liked in that moment how, you know, even the priest was like, "Yeah, I have no idea if it exists or not." I just think it's a nice thought, kind of a
Right. Yeah.
thing. And sometimes it's just the thought of it that makes a difference.
Dude, yeah, I believe that. Hmm. But yeah, like that was also nice. I do agree how it isn't really, I guess, like nothing's confirmed. Like even the priest who is supposed to be this like man of God, even he is like not 100%, I guess, sure or on board or whatever. But still, yeah, it was a nice scene.
So, something that I just want to clarify is it's not so much about the goddess, which apparently is what they, I think, believe in
Yeah.
this volume. It's about heaven. So I'm not sure if the dwarves as a clan still like believed in a goddess per se, or even had their own gods. But it's just that when they die, they just return or they return to nothing versus continuing on.
True, true.
Which according to uh, Heiter's religion was that, yeah, there is a heaven, there is a place where the souls rest,
Oh yeah, that
kind of
that
a
that's a
thing.
good point. I didn't really put that together, or I guess my interpretation of Eisen's words was that, well, that he wasn't a religious person at all, but I guess you're right. It could be that he is of a religion that, well, basically just views death differently. Definitely could be
Yeah,
that.
I mean,
Mm.
they're of tradition, so
Right.
they had some sort of tradition, and whether that is being completely, unbelieving of any sort of religious belief, or maybe they have a belief in some earth god or something. I don't know. Anyway,
Mm.
yeah, it's not quite clear, but I do think that now he's choosing to believe that there is a heaven, a place where potentially he could, or where the souls could rest, I guess you could say.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. But it was interesting. I guess speaking of the religion that we learn a bit of through Heiter, you mentioned heaven is a thing that he mentions, and Frieren mentioned the goddess in a conversation with Heiter.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems to be a monotheistic religion, uh, probably somewhat similar, or at least inspired by Christianity, or at least in that vein. It is at least what I kind of got of that religion from this book. Obviously, there isn't much to go on, but it's the vibe I got, I guess.
Yeah.
Anyway, anything more on Eisen? I think I'm done with him.
I just wonder if he'll return to the story again, or if this is the last time we're going to see him.
Ah,
I mean, it could go either way. It's just, yeah, I just wonder because he gives his last request to Frieren, and then that's basically where the story ends. So I don't know. I just wonder if that's going to be the end for him.
yeah. So for a moment, when I read the chapter the first time, or this volume the first time, at the end there, I for a moment I thought that he would go with Frieren and Fern to the demon's castle, or the demon king's castle. But then I figured not probably not. That doesn't really seem to be the case. But that said, I feel pretty confident that he will return somehow, even if just for one final scene. I do think I do think Frieden will meet him at least once more before he passes.
Okay,
It's my
nice.
thinking, or maybe it's just wishful thinking. I don't know.
I mean, he could be there next chapter, just seeing them off, if unless
Mm.
if they haven't left already. But yeah, I mean, it'd be nice to see him one last time before he passes.
Yeah. I guess what's interesting with him is that obviously because of his big Viking helmet and his massive beard, we don't really see his face much. Like
No.
we never do. So it makes it kind of hard to I guess pinpoint his age or like to see like how old is he really. So I mean obviously he is aging. He is past his prime. We know that for sure. But I guess just how old is he? Like and so with that in mind, it's hard to I guess know if he has plenty more time to appear or if he doesn't. But I do hope to see him like at least or rather for Frieren to meet him another time after they leave him here.
Cool.
Anyway, is that it on all of the four party members of the who slayed the Demon King?
Yeah.
Cool. Then moving on to Fern. And here I said I kept very good track on her age because I was just out of curiosity on my on my second read through that I had today. I remember on my first read through I was throughout it a bit confused. Obviously there is one chapter where she turns 16.
Right. That helps.
That really helps. But then there's more time that passes after that and like so I didn't know how old she was at the end of it. But I kept close attention to it today and so she turned 16 27 years after the death of Himmel. We're lucky to get those little declarations of the time frame sort of at the start of most of the chapters, or every chapter maybe actually. But anyway, 27 years after the death of Himmel, she turned 16, meaning that 20 years after the death of Himmel, which was when she and Frieren first met, she was 9.
Makes sense.
So that was when they met, and then they left on their journey at some point between her being 13 and 15, because it was a bit hard to say because there wasn't like an exact time there, because Heiter collapsed when when Fern was 13,
Right.
but then the next kind of declaration of the time was when she was 15, and by then they had been traveling together for a little bit, but it was unsure of how long really that had been. So they started traveling together between the ages of 13 and 15 anyway. And then this book ends when Fern is 17. So yeah, for anyone who really wanted to know, that's the case. And I wonder because time definitely was passing throughout this book. Obviously more so in the first half than the second half, but still time was constantly moving forward more or less. So I wonder how much it's going to continue doing that, and in terms of Fern, like how old is she going to end up being?
Right.
And stuff like that. Is she gonna die of old age at some point? You know, who knows?
I wonder, is it going to significantly slow down? But then again, they got to get to it, a certain point. And their journey, the journey with Himmel took 10 years, probably for various reasons, like fighting forces. But, it's not a short trip, as far as I understand.
Right.
So, how much is she going to age during that time? It'll be interesting to think, and I wonder if she'll reach a point where she wants to start a family, or maybe she's like, I'm done. Like,
right.
and will she go all the way to old age? Like who?
True.
I don't know. That could be another interesting thing where Frieren spends basically her whole time, or vice versa. Fern spends her whole life basically with Frieren, and she's there to see that. So I don't know. I think that would be an interesting dynamic that hopefully would be covered in later volumes, not necessarily volume 3 or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Right.
But yeah,
right.
whatever they want to do. Maybe this would be kind of a 2-year eternity type of situation.
Yeah. Right. I had that thought as well, where obviously we're dealing with a character who lives for basically an eternity. And yeah, what if, what if? But yeah, I hope it isn't, because I don't want to see Fern die. At least not before she, grows old, I guess. But even that, I don't really want to see either.
And that's the thing. Right now, it seems that this story is focused on telling Frieren's story about her 3 friends and the 10-year journey that they had, and not so much about what happens after that. Although that is a key factor in telling the story about the past as well.
True.
So I imagine time will slow down to a point um, that maybe Fern won't age. Like maybe there'll be a couple volumes where she kind of sticks around in her late teens and early 20s.
Yeah, it could be. I just, for some reason, I sort of got the feeling that she was there to stay as a permanent companion to Frieren. Obviously, that's unrealistic as well because Frieren will long outlive Fern.
Yeah.
In the grand scheme of things. So yeah, yeah.
I mean, the story could definitely end with Fern's death, I suppose, and then Frieden like moving forward.
Oh.
Um, but I mean, obviously they're. I feel like this will have a few volumes, so there'll be a grand adventure along the grand Tuka. There will be an adventure along the way, and it actually goes into one of my points with Fern.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess we can go back to some of her past later on, but just because we're on the topic, she seems to have not as much patience as, say, Frieren does.
Well,
because obviously there's a difference in species, but she kind of gets a little upset when they're doing menial, tiny little tasks like chores.
Oh, yeah.
When we could be doing really grand things, especially with your magic, we could be doing a lot of good, and yet we're here, plucking pumpkins or trying to find a big tree in a grove of big trees. Like,
yeah.
And yeah, it seems like she is very much aware that her time and understanding of time is much different than Frieren's, and maybe she gets a little bit impatient about that. Understandably so.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. I think another thing that I thought was kind of interesting about that is that it doesn't really it seems to be a bit of a new experience for Frieren to be traveling with someone like Fern. In obviously in a couple of ways, but regarding this, how they perceive time differently. It doesn't seem like her three previous travel companions really, I guess, were that much bothered about it or talked about it too much with her. I guess it's a different in a group dynamic like that where a majority of the characters aren't elves. She might not be able to make those sorts of suggestions as often, perhaps, like to do those really long-winded things. But when it's just her and Fern, obviously that makes it a bit different, especially since she has a bit more. Well, she can decide more since she's like the master of the two. In a sense.
Himmel was the leader of their group, and they had
true
an objective from the king to go kill the demon king.
Exactly.
So
there was that
it's a little different.
Yeah, but what I guess I said a lot of things that I didn't actually mean to say right there. but
been there, honey.
But basically, my main point there was that Fern has known Frieren since she was 9 years old, since she was a little child, and time perception for children is much different compared to time perception for adults.
Oh yeah.
Like even with if you just look at humans, like normal people, obviously it's time seems to pass much slower for kids. So
you know how long summer vacation was?
Right.
Forever.
Yeah.
And then you know how long school was? Even longer.
Yes. So I think that's probably a big reason why Frieren has suddenly kind of understood or kind of realized this is because she's been traveling with someone who, at least starting off, was just a little child, and so she's, I guess they've been able to talk about that in a different way.
Well, so going into Fern's childhood, she was a war orphan.
Yeah.
Heiter found her and took her in, and discovered that she has an affinity for magic or ability to use magic, and that's what she ended up choosing, I guess.
Right.
And to see her work so diligently to shoot that hole in that boulder on the cliffside, very endearing. And then that panel or that page really where you turn the page and you see it there, with with a hole in it. Oh, I thought it was very well done.
Yeah, 100%. I really like
You
that.
know, right at the end of Heiter's life, she's ready. She's ready to protect herself. She's ready to move on. And yeah, it was good.
Very good. Yeah. It was also nice to see like one of the earliest kind of impressions we got about her was that she had a very good affinity for magic, just in general. That even Frieren, who is like a master mage, supposedly, I mean, she was one of the people that stopped the Demon King after all. Even she can't detect her like magic presence, because Fern is supposedly very good at controlling her mana. So I thought that was just an interesting little detail. Obviously, mana is brought back into the story again when they're talking about the killing magic and like defensive magic and stuff like that, which was also another really interesting part. I thought, like just world building wise, kind of how the magic works and sort of the history of the magic and stuff like that. But anyway, it was cool to learn that she is she's a promising as a mage.
Absolutely. Going way back again, this is kind of a cute moment where she finds the seed rats. She kind of starts hiding them. I don't know. Find it funny. One, I found it funny she was able to pick up squirrels like that. I guess they were kind of docile, maybe. Anyway.
Yeah.
That was cute, I thought.
Very cute. And actually, when I saw that, when I read it the first time, I sort of got the feeling that like one of them or both of them would become like her familiar or something like that moving forward.
That would have been cute.
That she would keep it.
Yeah.
But I guess not.
Darn it. By the end of the volume, I think you could say she's, I mean, in a lot of aspects, she's the more responsible one of the pair. I mean, she even comments that she feels like she acts as Frieren's mother. And yeah, I mean, I don't blame her for all the things she has to do to get her up on time and whatnot. Yeah, it's funny, but I like the dynamic that they have.
Yeah, dude, I've been really enjoying it for this book at least, and yeah, very excited to see their dynamic kind of continue and see where that goes.
And it was sweet that Frieren remembered Fern's birthday.
Yeah.
And gave her that gift, and Fern expressed how happy she was that Frieren took the time to try to get to know her.
Exactly.
I mean, yeah, that means the world. And you know, maybe Frieren doesn't understand that yet, but I think to a lot of people, just trying, and not, you know, failing epically, but trying, is a really, I don't know, endearing thing to do.
Absolutely.
One moment I loved was when Frieren falls asleep before the sunset. Fern wakes up. It's like, oh, she's sleeping. She's sleeping.
Yeah, that was great. But she's able to get her to the sunset in time anyway. Yeah, and also how when they're like kind of rushing toward the coast, after she gets Frieren out of bed, and Frieren kind of, while sort of half sleeping, she says thank you, Fern, and there's this little panel where Fern just kind of looks kind of happily at Frieren there, and I don't know, it was a small moment, but it was a nice moment that I really enjoyed.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anything more on Fern?
Mm-mm.
Then, is there any other character? I don't have any other character things noted down necessarily here, but what about you?
I have two. So, Flamme, she's Frieren's master, as we established. She has the ability, or discover the ability, to communicate with dead souls at one point.
Right.
That ends up being in End, or however you pronounce it, which is where the Demon King's castle is. Yes. So that's fun.
Yeah, dude, that's a lot of fun. And actually, on that name of that place, Ende is how because I'm thinking of it as the German word for end.
Yeah.
So I guess, or at least I pronounce it that way.
Sure.
But yes, that is great.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if there's any sort of connection between Flamme and the Demon King, or not. I'm not sure.
Interesting. I didn't think about that.
You know, at the very least, the Demon King set up camp there for a reason, but maybe Frieren knows why. Maybe I don't know.
Hmm.
But anyway, so that's their destination.
Yeah.
So that's cool. And then my last character is Qual.
Oh yeah.
Just the strongest magic used in the demon army, and his magic led to incredible advancements in magic over the past 80 years,
Yeah.
which they both are like, wow, or they being Theoden and Qual are both like, wow, that's kind of a short amount of time,
Yeah.
and yet humans were able to do so much. Is it implying that, let's say, Frieren had 80 years to dive into magic more? Like, would she not be able to make the same progress as humans in that sense? Or Qual, like, would he not be able to make that same kind of progress? And they both seem very smart and able to pick up on that kind of stuff.
So the way I interpreted that, because I also found that really interesting, but I sort of viewed that as, I guess, humans were able to kind of discover and kind of come up with the new methods at a pace that I guess elves wouldn't have been able to do, or at least that elves were surprised by. But then elves like Frieren can probably still learn it if taught just as well as a human could potentially.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I don't doubt about the learning part,
Mm-mm.
but I guess maybe there's a difference in how fast they would be able to come up with something like that, which is surprising because usually elves, not all the time, but a lot of the times elves are perceived as these incredibly superior beings uh, who basically do everything better than humans can, except populate.
True.
Humans are basically like bunnies.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. That is true, and I guess we haven't seen any other elves other than Frieren in
That
this
yeah, that was
story.
another point I wanted to bring up.
Yeah, and so I feel like, well, we only have her to sort of base our idea of elves on, and as far as this
Mm-hmm.
universe goes, and looking at her, I mean, she is, well, she is slow, and or she isn't in a hurry, at least in the present day story where we see her
Mm-hmm.
mostly. And to be fair, she doesn't have like a distinct goal in mind for a majority of this book. So
Right.
I guess it's fair, but at the same time, there is definitely like a slow pace to her that no human would have. Like no human would spend as long as she did on finding the blue moon weeds, probably.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
And then just last thing on Qual is cool fight. I thought that I mean it was a very brief one, but it's one of those kind of brief moments of actions that we get in this volume. I'm not expecting much in this series
Mhm.
in terms of action. I have no expectations of that, and I'm totally okay with that. But just seeing this a little bit of a magical battle was really neat.
Yeah, and I agree. Like I also don't really expect to see a whole lot of action necessarily throughout this series, but I still really enjoyed this piece of action that we got. Not necessarily for the action itself, but sort of the implications and like kind of what we learned in that scene about the magic of the world and sort of
True.
how it's perceived by elves and by a demon who has been away from the world for 80 years and stuff like that. I thought that was just really interesting to find out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess that is all for the characters though.
Yeah.
Then I guess on predictions. So we did at the end, as you mentioned, I think a little earlier, at the end of the book, we did kind of get more of a concrete goal for the story, kind of as
Right.
to where it's gonna go on from here, and it's to that Demon King's castle, which, by the way, I absolutely loved that big drawing of the castle.
Yeah,
It was
it's really
so
good.
cool looking, like all the towers and the walls, and oh
Mm-hmm.
my god, an incredible artwork. I think
Absolutely.
beautiful. But anyway, that's where they're going because that's where a lot of souls are supposedly gathered, according to the message. Uh, so I guess my just kind of overall general prediction for the story as a whole moving forward, like on a long term thing, is that Frieren and Fern are going to make their way there, of course, but on their way there, they will continue to keep on visiting places that Frieren and her party visited on their journey. As they started doing in this one, there were a couple chapters like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's gonna be chapters like that on their way to the castle and then they're gonna reach the castle and like eventually, and I guess there's gonna be some sort of climax event there. Either that's gonna be the end of the whole story, or that's gonna be the end of just an arc, perhaps. I guess it's hard to say, but yeah, I guess that's just like a general big old prediction.
Yeah. So you're thinking it's going to take a few volumes to get there, like basically the entire story to get to that point.
Well, that's what I'm unsure of. I could see them reaching the castle as just being the end of an arc, like within the story, as well. But I definitely could also see it being the end of the story potentially. Although I probably lean mostly toward it being the end of just a one arc within the bigger story.
I mean, absolutely, they could end it there. I mean, it is the end or end, whatever.
Right.
And yeah, like it would be a good place to finish it all. But I wonder how it could be interesting if they get to that point. They talk to Himmel or something else happens and it requires them to go a few other places or whatnot. I don't know, like just not necessarily having to go all the way to a certain point and then it ends, but having to go back and forth, like that kind of situation. I wonder if that's how it will go down. That said, I could also see it ending there.
Yeah, it really depends on how long it takes them to get there, I suppose. And obviously it also depends on how long this series is going to be.
Right, how long the series would be. It depends on the pace of a few things. I think the next volume could easily set the pacing and the tone for how their journey, I guess, will go.
True, good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess this is a question that we can maybe more easily answer next volume.
Yes, absolutely.
I wonder if Himmel ever had a family.
Oh,
or did he remain single? Now, that could be, there could be some sort of love thing there, and maybe that's why Eisen and Heiter are so, I guess, invested in helping Frieren talk to Himmel again, because maybe they knew that Himmel was very much into her or very much in love with her, and so maybe they're trying to have some sort of connection there. But maybe Himmel also had a family because he gave up hope. Well, then again, maybe that's not the message that he wants to tell. I don't know. But if he did have a family, it would be interesting if they saw said relatives, said descendants.
Absolutely. And I guess that could be said for all of the three party members. Although I guess Himmel seems to be more of a, or I guess it seems like he should be more prominent.
I don't think Heiter would. Unless, well, I mean, he's a drunk priest. Maybe he did some stuff he wasn't supposed to do when he was drunk.
Yeah.
Eisen, I don't know. Maybe Eisen will have some ancestors or some descendants. Prosperity. Who knows?
Like, I think it's a possibility for all of them, but I do agree that it's probably the most likely, especially at least narratively, for the story to kind of deal with Himmel's descendants.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And then one other prediction I have is or just more of a question, where are the other elves and dwarves?
Exactly.
Yeah. Dead,
yeah. Oh yeah, the
gone.
Dwarves too.
Right. So we see all these humans and they're both helping humans. But what about their own people? I guess in the case of Eisen, his parents died, or his village got attacked by demons. Was that the end of the dwarves, or is there some other colony somewhere? Are they just in the middle of a human nation? Where, and then where are the elves? Where is, I guess, Frieren's family or people?
Yeah. I think you might be right though that this country might just be like a primarily human country, perhaps. And that there probably exists other nations or other kingdoms where other creatures live more primarily.
Maybe.
It's probably going to be my thinking for now, at least. Or actually, the dwarf village, or at least Eisen's village, which is supposedly a dwarf village, had been attacked. So that's on the same continent. Well, could still be a different country. Hmm. I don't know. I don't know. I
Yeah.
do want to see more of both of those though. Like more dwarves and more elves, please.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Hmm.
Maybe Frieren can learn something from another elf's perspective on human nature and whatnot.
Right. And I wonder how different would they be from her, and kind of in what way would they be different from her? I wonder.
Right.
So that's yeah. I guess these are mostly questions, but I do want them answered eventually.
Oh, of course, of course.
Uh, and I guess speaking of Eisen, we talked about his eventual death earlier, and I think it's possible that he might die as early as next volume, but I could also see him living on for several volumes before his death comes.
Okay.
So I have a hard time really pinpointing that, but it will come. I'm sure we will see it. And on that note, and we also talked about Fern's death, that could also come eventually. I dread it, but it very likely may come. So,
Yeah.
yes. Is that all for predictions?
So for predictions, I just have a couple things that I want to say really short. There's just
Yeah,
some
yeah.
minor typos. I don't know if you experienced it in yours.
Yeah, I was a bit sad about that.
I think I only found two. There may have been more, but there was one where like it said Himmel the Great, but it put a the before Himmel, so
Yeah, the
the
Himmel
Himmel the Great.
Yeah, I noticed that as well.
And then the one that was actually really bad was
Mm.
Frieden calls Heiter Himmel at one point.
Yeah, I
It's like,
noticed that.
ooh.
That was the worst one. And those are the only two I can recall off the top of my head right now as well. But I
Yeah.
thought there was another one
Oh.
earlier on in the first chapter as well.
Well,
Um,
it seemed like the typos were in the early first two chapters, but then the rest of the
mm,
volume was totally fine.
yeah, so hopefully there will be no more of that. But yeah. Sadly there was a bit of that, and sadly one of them was kind of bad. Yeah.
Yeah, that was like that. Yeah.
Oh well.
But then the last thing I'll say before we talk about overall impressions is
Huh?
it, a message that I felt was in this story that I really liked is sometimes it's about the people you are with rather than the thing you are doing. And obviously the sunset uh, chapter was
Mm.
kind of an example of that. But I think in a lot of cases it wasn't so much what they were doing or what Frieden was doing. It was with the people she was with or who she
Yeah.
was with.
Right. Absolutely. And I could definitely see that becoming kind of even more prominent as the story continues, and
Yeah,
as Frieren probably is going to come to realize just how precious those 10 years were, the ones that she spent with her party.
absolutely.
So yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
But then moving into the final stretch of this discussion, the impressions that we have, and like kind of what we think so far about this series that we have just recently started reading. And I guess I'll kick it off a little bit with saying that I enjoyed my second read through of this book a lot more than my first, cause
Oh.
or well, I that's not to say I didn't like it on my first read through, but
Hmm.
on my first read through, I guess I wasn't completely sold.
Okay.
I may have rated it, if I would have rated it then, I would have
Hmm.
probably rated it like a 6 out of 10,
Okay.
which isn't bad for me. It's just
No.
not I would have wished for it to be better. But then I reread it today, and I I'm not sure why, but I appreciated it a whole lot more. Uh, or at least enough to rate it a 7 out of 10 now. And
Yeah. Yeah.
of course, it's just the first volume. Anything can happen.
Right.
I think this story has great potential for an increased score.
Hmm.
As the story continues. But a 7 out of 10 for me after the first volume, I think is great. It's promising, and I'm very excited to continue to read this one. What about you?
Yeah, I'd give it a 7 out of 10 as well.
Sweet.
It's a turn pager, but it's also a very chill kind of page turner where you're just enjoying the moment and also growing with this very unorthodox person.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, well, not even human. So it's. I mean, it's not that actually. It's not the first time we've experienced that in Umami manga, but
Fair.
uh, this is a different light and a different take on that.
Absolutely.
I love the concept of having basically the party more or less dead
Mm-hmm.
in the first volume, and then you have to relive the events through her memories and their new journey. I really like that concept,
Yeah.
and I think the writing so far has been pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
So it checks off a lot of boxes. And let me also emphasize how great the art is. I think this is very solid. One of the most beautiful manga I've read. I think there's just a lot of good um, scenery moments and character designs. I just think it's overall very solid.
Yeah. Yeah, I really agree. And actually, I looked up the two makers of this manga because there's one person. It's Kanehito Yamada has written the story, and
Hmm.
the art is by Tsukasa Abe. And I looked them both up on my anime list to see kind of what else they had done before. And Tsukasa Abe doesn't have anything other than Frieren on their as things that they've
Wow.
done as far as manga and stuff goes. So this might just be this person's first work, and yeah, I think I agree. It's like it looks beautiful. Um,
Absolutely.
Kanehito Yamada has written and drawn. I think he had done two other things besides Frieren. One of them he had both written and drawn, and the other one he had only written, just like he does Frieren.
Hmm.
I didn't really pay attention to what it or didn't put on, or I didn't remember what those series were. They were kind of short things I looked up,
Ah,
so nothing that had lasted very long supposedly, but
gotcha.
still, like, both are not that, I guess, established.
Hmm.
So I feel like Frieren could like very much be like their big break potentially. I mean, at least I feel like there's good potential for that.
Absolutely. I'll say that if this keeps improving, like if second volume is just as good or better and just keeps going, I think you could have a new animated series on your hand. I think this kind of
Yeah.
fits a niche that a lot of people would really enjoy,
Hmm.
the simpler kind of chill adventure, but really going into the human aspect, the human nature kind of thing
Yes. Yeah.
versus action.
Totally. Totally. And I actually one thing I wanted to touch on that you mentioned earlier when you talked about what you liked about this was kind of the premise being kind of how Frieren, well, how she has these flashbacks to her past with her old party members, and how we as readers
Hmm.
get to know them, and her as well to a degree, get to know those
True.
characters through the memories. And
Hmm.
it was that part of the premise, because when I read the premise for Frieren, because I was looking around basically for kind of what other manga options do we have to cover on Umami manga, and
Hmm.
I came across Frieren without knowing anything about it, and I read the premise, which said basically that, like, it basically explained kind of that it would, well, she would go on a journey, and on her journey she would uh, be looking back on her previous journey, and kind of well, it would deal with that a bit. And when I read that premise, like, that really spoke to me, and it made me really interested to read this story. And so James and I both bought this first volume without having read anything really. We just kind of very
Yeah,
blindly threw ourselves into this, and
it's true.
I'm glad we did, because so far, not far into it, but still, so far I'm very happy that we have started covering this one.
Yeah, for me it was. Uh, I saw Viz Media. They're the ones who published this in America,
Hmm.
or well, in English. They posted a preview of it on social media, and so I read the first few pages, and it was enough to hook me, enough to get me intrigued. It's like, all right, I'll give it a shot,
Sweet.
and this I think would be good discussion. And yeah, I think if you are a person who doesn't mind a more relaxed, more about a person's growth kind of a story, than say, yeah, action heavy, comedy heavy,
Mm.
or any of those kind of genres, then I think you would really enjoy this, at least by the first volume.
Yeah.
Come back to me in 5 volumes later. I mean, that's probably going to take a year or so, but um, we'll let you know if it's worth putting down, however how much it costs for those 5 volumes.
Right. No, absolutely. And yeah, it just, I don't know, and like, I guess the last thing that I will say about the impressions for me, and kind of a reason why I really enjoyed reading through the chapters of this book, is that I just really like the two main characters, or at least present day characters, Frieren and Fern. Really, really enjoy both of them.
Yeah.
And that just really helps to, help me enjoy the story as a whole. And I guess on that, do you have a favorite character from the story as a whole? So far.
A favorite character?
From this book, yeah, favorite character.
Yeah, good question. It'd probably have to be Frieren. I just, yeah, I think her story is the most interesting right now. But yeah, obviously Fern is a good second.
Yeah, and I think I'm gonna echo that exactly, because I mean, obviously Frieren is the main character, like the main protagonist, and so obviously she has a lot more panel time and stuff like that. But yeah, I really enjoyed her character in this book.
Mm-hmm.
So then, moving into the final part of the discussion, we are and as I mentioned briefly at the start, we are really on top of it with this series now. We are covering the first volume within the month that it was first released in English, and we do intend to continue covering this one because it seemed like we both enjoy this first book, and the intention is to cover each new one as they come out physically in English. So that's the plan from here on out. And yeah, I guess I mean I assume plenty of people have probably read like ahead chapters online, like fan translations and stuff like that. But and obviously, like, anyone who listens is welcome to listen to us. But I also want to, I guess, encourage people to read along with us. If you also just read this first book like we have, then, you know, a couple months from now, maybe in February or January, I think January 11th is when book 2 comes out. So
was it January? Okay.
I think it's January 11th. So at some point after that, so maybe later in January or early February, we'll cover the second book. And yeah, please do read along with us. I think this series has great promise, so I'm just really excited to continue.
Same.
Nice. Then any final words?
This is the final. This is it. This is final the movie.
Yes.
The end.
It is the end. The end of this episode. Not the end of anything else. Umami Manga will continue. Fret not.
So this isn't the final.
It's not. No, not yet. But with that all said, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoy our content, you can follow us on Twitter at Umami Manga, and it would be lovely if you'd like to support us by either rating our show on the podcast platforms or subscribing to our channel Umami Manga on YouTube. If you like this episode, please share it with anyone you think might enjoy it too. Thank you again so much for listening, and we'll see you next time when we'll talk about Volume 2. Bye-bye.
See ya.